verses 4 through 7. Joshua chapter 4, verses 4 through 7. So Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the sons of Israel, one man from each tribe. And Joshua said to them, "Cross again to the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan, and each of you take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Israel. Let this be a sign among you, so that when your children ask later, saying, 'What do these stones mean to you?' then you shall say to them, 'Because the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall become a memorial to the sons of Israel forever.'"
And if you'll keep your text or your Old Testaments open to that text, hope to be coming to that again in just a little bit. Good morning. And I hope you have a proper Memorial Day weekend. It sounds kind of funny to say a happy Memorial Day weekend, doesn't it? Based on the idea of Memorial Day itself. I hope you're familiar with this holiday. It's one our nation has set aside to remember those who've lost their lives for defending our freedom. We have a Veterans Day in November for those surviving veterans, and we try to honor them. We also have Armed Forces Day, in which we try to honor those who are active military. So that's what this weekend is all about. It's been set aside as a memorial. And I want to talk this morning about the best use of memory. This weekend we're remembering those who've sacrificed their lives for our freedom. What do we do every first day of the week? We remember the sacrifice that Jesus made for us. And some of you have personally tasted, so to speak, the bitter fruit of Alzheimer's. We hear a lot about Alzheimer's. What's Alzheimer's all about? Except folks who are losing their ability to remember. Now, if you're someone who has a loved one or who has had a loved one with Alzheimer's, when you approach them, I don't know about you, but for me, there was one question that I always asked. It was the first question, the most important question when you're talking to someone with Alzheimer's. Can you guess what it is? I don't know if somebody might have said it, but for me, it's, do you know who I am? Do you know who I am? And this is especially poignant if you're talking about somebody who was a parent, a mother or a father. I would say, can you imagine asking one of your parents if they recognize you, if they know who you are? But some of us don't have to imagine because we know what that's like. You come in and you say, do you know who I am? And they'll say yes or no. And their ability to say yes is based on memory. But memory of what? It's memory of a relationship. Memory of a relationship. And when you think about it, well, even if you don't think about it, isn't that what life is all about? Nobody comes into the room of a loved one who has Alzheimer's and says, "Do you remember how much money you made?" Nobody comes in and says, "Do you remember how big your house is or was? Or how many houses you had? Or your last vacation? Do you remember your favorite sports team? Or if they won the game last night or lost?" See, we don't even think to ask questions like that. We come in and we want to know, do you know who I am? And it's marvelous to see the look in their eyes when they recognize you. And they don't just recognize you by name. Yeah, I think you're one of my kids, or I think your name might be so-and-so. But they know who you are and their eyes light up because eventually that light will be gone. It's sad. It's just sad how it affects them because it affects your relationship with them. The best use of memory for me is about relationships. How many things do we like to remember? Now, you ladies that cook and you ladies that bake, you are just walking encyclopedias of how to do things. I remember asking my mom about recipes. She would prepare something that I really liked, and I'd say, Mom, how do you make that? She'd say, well, I just put in some of this and some of that and some of this. Well, how much? Well, just as much as you need to put in. You know that. God knows that. I don't have a clue. Write it down. And she would write it down, and I would do it the way she wrote it down, and it still wouldn't be the same. Because that's just the way things work. And what am I doing right now? I'm recalling a memory of a relationship. You and I do this all the time, and it's what enriches our lives. Why do we take vacations? Do we just take vacations so we can see neat places and go neat places? Or is the real value in vacations the memories that we build with one another? And not just vacations, we do it in work. And if we take advantage of situations where we're working with people or being with people, and we use those opportunities to build relationships, that's what gives life its richness. That's what memory is all about, remembering that we are related to one another, and especially that we are related to God. That's the best use of memory. It's all about relationships. Now keep a mark there at Joshua 4, but start with me in Genesis chapter 39. Some of you who are familiar with this story will be immediately able to access what I'm talking about. But if you're not familiar with it, it's where Joseph had been sold into slavery in Egypt. A fellow by the name of Potiphar had bought Joseph, and Joseph was serving in his house. Joseph was serving so well, so faithfully, so efficiently that Potiphar put Joseph in charge of his whole house, and then Potiphar left for business. While Potiphar was away on business, what was Potiphar's wife all about? Well, she was all about trying to have an affair with Joseph. What did Joseph say? This is Genesis 39, verse 9. When she approached Joseph, he said, "There is no one greater in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you." What's he calling on first? He's calling on his relationship with Potiphar. Said, "Lady, that guy's your husband, and he's put everything in my charge, and there's nothing greater in this house than me." And he says, because you are his wife, you've got a relationship with him. And then he says this, "How then could I do this great evil and sin against what?" Oh, it's not a what, is it? It's a who. Sin against God. Joseph didn't say, sin against the rules for religion for my people, or sin against the rules of morality, or sin against what's right and wrong. He said, sin against God. He says, Potiphar, I've got a relationship with him. He entrusted me with all of these things, and with you, his wife. And you've got a relationship with him. You're his wife. You should regard and respect and honor that relationship. And I have a relationship with God. And how can I do this sin and sin against God? It's just one brief verse in the Old Testament history. But what a huge collection of values it is and teachings it is for us today here in the 21st century. People ask sometimes, how can that Bible be relevant? Right there it is. There's the relevancy of a record thousands of years old. Well, now, Joshua chapter 4. What Johnny read for us was the first, or not the first, but part of the first several verses where Joshua is telling the guys he selected from every tribe. They're crossing the Jordan River. As a matter of fact, the priests have already carried the ark, and you know how the priests would do it. Am I still amplified stepping out here? Can you hear me in the back? Sometimes I step out and I don't know if anybody's hearing me in the back. All right, it's good. The priests got the ark, and you know how the ark was carried. You saw it in the movie, right? So they have these rings on the ark. It's like a big box, and it's layered over with gold, and they've got rods of acacia wood that they put through those rings, and those rods are layered with gold. And the priests are not allowed to touch the ark. They just touch those rods that are put through the rings, and they are carrying the ark, and they are the first ones to step into the Jordan River. And when their feet step into the Jordan River, what happens? The water parts, just like the Red Sea had parted for them when they crossed on dry land to get away from Egypt en route to the Promised Land. Now the priests walked into the middle of the Jordan and they stayed there until all of the children of Israel got across. And then Joshua tells these 12 guys, one each from each tribe, you go back into the river and you get a rock and you put it on your shoulder. So he's not talking about a little rock you'd put in your pocket. He's talking about a big rock you'd heave up and put on your shoulder. And they carried those rocks out of the bottom of the river and they stacked them up. Why? As a memorial. And he specifically points out, your children are going to ask you what these rocks are here for. And these rocks are going to provide an opportunity for you to call to memory what happened here this day. So he's looking down line. It's not just about these folks this day, but it's about Israelites who are going to be coming after. There's a relationship that God is building, not just with these people, but it's a relationship he intends to go on and on and on into eternity. And it's interesting to me that this isn't just something that's recorded here in the first chapter. When you get to the last part of the fourth chapter, starting in verse 20, it says, these 12 stones which they'd taken from the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal. Hold on to that name, Gilgal. He said to the sons of Israel, when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what are these stones? Oh, wait a minute. I thought he had just talked about this being a memorial. Well, he had. Is he repeating himself? Is it being redundant? No. He's driving a point home, I believe. When your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what are these stones? Then you shall inform your children, saying, Israel crossed this Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you crossed, just as the Lord your God had done to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed. That all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, so that you may fear the Lord your God forever. Now, was the whole point just so people would fear God and respect God? Or was the point that fear is supposed to be the seed that gets into people's heart that drives them to seek a relationship with God? We know from the rest of the book that that's what it's always about. It's always about God seeking a relationship with us. Why in the world he would want to, I can't fathom. Can you explain that to me? Well, here's something else I don't completely understand. I sort of understand it. You go buy a puppy. Some people spend hundreds of dollars for puppies. What's that puppy going to do when you put it in your house? It's going to pee all over everything. And if you don't box it up, it's going to chew up everything. Because that's what puppies do. But who doesn't want a puppy? No, I'm not saying we're like puppies in God's eyes, but I'm saying there are a lot of things in life I don't understand. And just because I don't understand why God would want to have a relationship with us, I can see the fact that he does. After all, how did he make us? He made us in his own image, and he has never forgotten that. The problem is we forget that. Our memory lapses forget, hey, I'm made in the image of God. How am I supposed to behave towards God? How am I supposed to behave towards my wife, towards my husband? How am I supposed to behave towards my children? If we remember that we are created in the image of God, it will change every relationship we have. Amen? You go to work. You know, we got this thing, this conflict between management and labor. But if you're labor, and you realize you're created in the image of God, how much are you going to give to your employer? 100%, because that's what God would have you to do. It's not about law. It's not about right and wrong. It's about what would God have me to do. When Joseph was tempted with Potiphar's wife, he came back to relationships, and he said, this is why we shouldn't do this. It's about relationships. And in my mind's eye, God is in heaven going, yes, the boy got it. It's about relationships. Yes, your relationship with Potiphar and his relationship with his wife and your relationship with me. Everything is about that. And if we remember that, how blessed our lives will be. Just to remember relationships. And so we read about this, and for two times in this one chapter, the reason for those stones being set up is provided. Malachi chapter 2. Now, Genesis, we read a little bit ago, that was the first book of the Old Covenant. Malachi is the last one. It's right up before Matthew. Malachi was the last prophet to get a word from God, and then for about 400 years there was silence as far as we know. God never inspired anybody to say or write anything else for that 400-year period about. But this is one of the last things that was said by the prophet Malachi, chapter 2. Malachi chapter 2. And Malachi was giving Israel God's message because Israel was not being very faithful. Israel was not remembering who he was. Malachi 2:13. This is another thing you do. You cover the altar of the Lord with tears, with weeping and with groaning, because he no longer regards the offering or accepts it with favor from your hand. What's going on? Well, they're making an offering to God, and he's not regarding that offering. Why not? Because their relationship is messed up, because they've forgotten really who he is. Yet you say in verse 14, for what reason? God answers, because the Lord has been a witness between you and who? You and the wife of your youth, against whom you have dealt treacherously, though she is your companion and your wife by covenant. Once again, can you see any relevance of the Scriptures in our day and age? Verse 15. But not one has done so who has a remnant of the Spirit. And what did that one do while he was seeking a godly offspring? Take heed then to your spirit, and let no one deal treacherously against the wife of your youth. He's talking about the relationship of marriage again. He's coming back to this idea that you're unholy because you've got unholy relationships. You're taking advantage of your wives. You're not being to them what you ought to be. You're not valuing them like you should. God says in verse 16, I hate divorce, says the Lord, the God of Israel. And him who covers his garment with wrong, says the Lord of hosts, so take heed to your spirit that you do not deal treacherously. Now, he's not talking about dealing treacherously with the law or dealing treacherously with things. He's talking about Israelites who were dealing treacherously with people, and specifically the most intimate, trusting relationship there ought to be, marriage. That's why God is taking issue with them here. 1 Corinthians chapter 11. What we're about to look at is God's instruction to the church through Paul about the Lord's Supper. They'd already been given evidently some instruction about it, and they were keeping it, but they weren't really keeping it the way it was supposed to be kept. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 17. But in giving this instruction, Paul writes, I do not praise you because you come together not for the better, but for the worse. For in the first place, when you come together as a church, I hear that divisions exist among you. And in part, I believe it. What's the problem? They're coming together. Is that the problem? The problem's not that they're coming together. They're coming together, but they have division. What's division? That's when relationships are separated. It's not supposed to be that way. When you go back to Proverbs chapter 6, and you read about the 7 things that the Lord hates, it's interesting to me that God inspired Solomon. Hey, I want you to put down here 7 things that I really hate. These just get on my nerves. They get under my skin. I hate them. God tells Solomon to write down, and he writes them down. You know what the 7th one is? The 7th one. Those who sow discord among brethren. Does that give us a clue that God wants us to have right relationships? That's what he's talking about here. What's the Lord's Supper all about? It's about us remembering what Jesus did for us, his sacrifice. Or how are we supposed to do it? We're supposed to do it with unity, with one another, with tight, solid, loving relationships. And he says, you come together, but you've got divisions. And I'm telling you, in verse 20, he says, this is not to eat the Lord's Supper. In other words, you're doing it so wrong that what you're doing is not the Lord's Supper. In eating, each one takes his own supper first, and one's hungry and another is drunk. Apparently they don't care what's happening to the other. He asked the question in verse 22, do you not have houses in which to eat and drink? Or do you despise the church of God and shame those who have nothing? You don't shame people you care about. You don't shame people you love. But when you don't care, when your relationship is not what it ought to be, that's what happens. And that's what God, through Paul, is railing against the church about. I've heard in the past, well, the Lord's Supper, that's supposed to be a regular meal. It's supposed to sit down and get enough bread and fruit of the vine to fill yourself up. And I think if you read verse 22, Paul is saying, no, if you want to get filled up, that's what you do at home. This is not a meal as we think of meals. This is a meal for a specific purpose. And what is the specific purpose of the meal? It's a memorial. It's a memorial. Verse 23. I received from the Lord that which I also delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus, in the night in which he was betrayed, took bread. And when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, this is my body. And then what did he say? It's for you. It's for you. Jesus wasn't doing this to fulfill some law only. He was doing this for us. It was for our benefit because he loves us. He cares about us. And he wanted this to be the fulfillment of what we needed so that our relationship with him could be complete, could be perfected, could be eternal. He said, this is my body which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same way, he took the cup also after supper, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. I like to underline things when I see them more than once in a passage. And so I've got in remembrance of me underlined in verse 24, and I've got in remembrance of me underlined in verse 25. But I also have in verse 17 underlined when you come together. In verse 18, I have underlined when you come together. I have verse 20 underlined when you come together. Later on in the text, in verse 33, I have underlined when you come together. And then coming together is mentioned again in verse 34. What are we supposed to do? Come together. But when we come together, is it just so all of our bodies can be in the same room, or is there more to it than that? See, we come together, we get our heads together, we get our minds together. What is there besides heads and minds? There's hearts, there's spirits, there's souls. We give ourselves up to our remembering Jesus, and we do it together with one another in mind at the same time. It's interesting what he says in verse 27. He says, therefore, whoever eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner shall be guilty of the body and the blood of the Lord. Now, obviously, I think this is a reference to the bread that represents his body, and the fruit of the vine that represents his blood. But what else is spoken of as the body of Christ? That's the church. What else is the church called? It's called the bride of Christ. Whenever we look into these truths, what we see over and over and over, and it just takes us deeper and deeper and deeper into relationship. How we relate to God and how he relates to us and what he's done for us through Jesus Christ. He said, verse 28, a man must examine himself, and in so doing he is to eat of the bread and drink the cup. For he who eats and drinks eats and drinks judgment to himself if he does not judge the body rightly. And for this reason, many among you are weak and sick, and a number sleep. But if we judged ourselves rightly, we would not be judged. But when we are judged, we are disciplined by the Lord, so that we will not be condemned along with the world. So then, my brother, when you come together to eat, there it is again, wait for one another. What's the best use of memory? Relationships. I want to encourage you this week to take some time and to think about relationships that you have right now and relationships you've had in the past and what those relationships mean to you. I thought for years that I would write back home where I grew up. And there's one particular man that set an example for me, and I've never told him that. And I thought, I'm going to confess that to the church Sunday morning. And then I'm going to go away from this lesson, and if God gives me life, I'm going to write that man a letter. And I'm going to tell him not just what my relationship with him has meant to me through the years, but what his influence has meant to me as far as my relationship with God goes. Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? What was it that the Hebrew writer wrote to the church? As you see the day approaching, provoke one another to love. Provoke one another to good works. It's not just about coming to church, it's about the relationships that we have with God and with His people. Is that an amen-worthy statement? I really think it is. Now, please don't take this to mean, oh, you mean we don't have to do what's in the Bible because it's all about relationships. No, if anybody gets that, it's the wrong message. Why does God teach us to do all of these things? It's about relationships. Why are we supposed to love one another? Because it's about relationships. Why are we supposed to meet together? It's about relationships. It's not fulfilling some legal requirement. It's about fulfilling God's will for us to be together. Nobody's going to get into heaven because they've ticked off some list of religious things you're supposed to do. The only way any of us are going to get into heaven is because we've got a relationship with God through His Son Jesus Christ, and His Holy Spirit lives in us, and we've been one of those among His people who shared the love of God. Now that's just what the Scriptures say. And everything that the world looks at and calls religious law, well, that's just part of what God teaches us, so we'll know how to live properly with one another. It's not legalism. It's the love of God in print. I hope you'll do that this week, and maybe you won't limit it to one. And maybe it doesn't have to be somebody from your growing up. Maybe it's somebody who's living in your house right now. Write them a letter. Tell them what you think. Show them how much you appreciate the relationship you've got with them. Buy a card. Send an email. Put a note someplace where they'll see it. Get lipstick. Oh, that's good. Get lipstick and write on somebody's window. You'll find a way to do it. Just express your appreciation for relationships you have now, just as God has through His Son expressed love for the relationship He wants to have with us. Well, that's the end of the lesson. I will conclude it, though, with Romans 6, just briefly. And I've preached from Romans 6 quite a bit. In the past, I thought people are going to get tired of me going to Romans 6. But I want you to see the relationship here. We read about the relationship in the Lord's Supper, but this is relationship here. Paul's writing to the church at Rome, people who've already obeyed the gospel. They've done what they need to do to be saved. He's not trying to teach them how to be saved. He's telling them what they've already done. And this is what he says in Romans 6, verse 3. Do you not know that all of us who've been baptized, where? Into Christ. Relationship. We've been baptized into His death. Therefore, we've been buried with Him through baptism into death, so that as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, so we too might walk in newness of life. Do you see the relationship that's expressed just in the simple act of baptism? We die. We're buried with Christ. We are raised with Christ by the Father to walk in new life, and that new life is the life we've got with Him. Thinking about our nation's history, none of us can go back in time. We can't go back to Valley Forge and show our appreciation for what happened there. We can't go back to Yorktown. We can't go back to Gettysburg. We can't go back to the Chosin Reservoir in Korea. We can't go back to the Yeshaw Valley for those who were there in 1969. We can't go back to the Argonne or the Ardennes or Iwo Jima or any of those places where men fought and died and shed their blood and lost their lives for our benefit. But we can go back to the cross. We can go back to the cross. You can do it today. You can go back to the cross if you'll just value that relationship enough. Let's stand and sing the invitation song.